Why did you never hear a love story between a white woman and a black man during slavery? In general, we are used to hearing love stories between white men and black women during slavery, although there was a certain social taboo on this type of relationship, considered socially prohibited and morally condemned by the church. Type of love story between a white man and a black woman where this type of human drama, where romanticism or love between each other, was never part of the relationship between a slave and its owner. Type of imposed relationship which we could not consider as a love story, we must see it as a tragedy, because in most cases the black woman was not the owner of her body, which was the property of her master. But were all marital relationships between a white man and a black woman a tragedy? My answer is no. In some of these relationships, even though we talk about the rape and exploitation of black women by her white master, the word love, respect, and commitment was, in many cases, the reason behind this interracial union. Perhaps that is why we should consider that just as there were consensual sexual relations between white men and black women, in the same way there were interracial relations between black men and white women during slavery. Try to answer the following question. Do you really believe that there was never an intimate relationship or sexual interaction between a white woman and a black man during slavery? We must be too naive to accept as true that kind of narrative about something we all know happened, especially when we all know that white men were intimate with black women. Type of behavior considered immoral by the society of the time, which was also imitated by white women. Although we have never read a written history about this type of forbidden relationship, although everyone knew what happened and more when the morality of the white woman is questioning. This tells you that a love story between a white woman and a black man was something unimagined, much less told. Although when you observe the reality of the levels of racial miscegenation between black and white during that time, it is a reality that cannot be hidden when you observe the increase in the amount of the mulatto population. Maybe that's why we should question the lack of veracity of a loving relationship between a white woman and a black man in a society where purity, beauty, and morality that could not be questioned never occurred when we talk about white women. Perhaps by telling the story of my life in which a white woman like me who was deeply in love with a black man, I will change that narrative that during slavery before the Civil War, there was never love between a white woman and a black man. Many historians acknowledge the relationship between a white man and a black woman, but never the relationship between a black man and a white woman. My question is why? This story could give you the answer. When you analyze the social position of white women during slavery, you could understand the reasons behind avoid talking about history of a relations between a white woman and a black man. This misrepresentation associated with racial miscegenation during slavery, the suppression of facts, false beliefs, and propaganda used by some white historians to perpetuate racial superiority, but also to protect the moral conduct of white women, will give you an idea of why white women were considered morally pure. We have always heard that white women acted as social ladies guided by Christian values, conservative in the way they dress, speak, behave, and above all, devoted to their families. Unlike black women who were considered immoral or promiscuous, women who acted with a behavior which encouraged sexual relations with any man, married or single, and gave birth to black and mulatto children without knowing the name of the father. When we hear about any type of marital relationship between a black woman and a white man by choice or imposed, the word love does not exist. This is where the word tragedy is the correct term to use when talking about this type of dramatic story that white people want to hide and blacks want to disclose. If you let me, I could tell you the story of a slave girl who, despite being the product of rape, turned into one of the most powerful, wealthy, and influential women in the business world in the northeast region of the state of New England, under the title, For the Love of My Black Sister, type of story which can be described as dramatic story about Sally, who was a colored girl, the daughter of a slave black woman named Alyssa who lived during slavery in Charleston, Carolina, in a plantation in Dorchester County. During that time, a dramatic event occurred that changed the life of Alyssa, a naive black girl enslaved on any given Sunday, a day of rest for the slaves on the large plantations of the time. Alyssa was raped by 3 white men on the banks of the Ashley River without caring about the luck for that black girl who lost her innocence, and the most precious that a woman can offer due to the unbridled desires of 3 white men who, apart from being raped, her body abusing one after the other, that day also destroyed her spirit. 9 months after this savage attack on an innocent young black girl who was barely 14 when she was brutally raped, she gave birth to a beautiful black girl named Sally, a mulatto girl who was sold to a businessman to keep his daughter company who couldn't walk, ending in a relationship between Sally and the family that brought her to be becoming one of the most powerful, wealthy, and influential women in the business world in the northeast region of the state of New England. This kind of a dramatic story, which can be considered as a tragedy depending on how you look at it, or we should see it as a love story between a white girl and a black girl who were best friends, who grew up as sisters in a family environment where differences did not exist, even though one was a slave who worked as a servant and the other girl was the daughter of the slave owner. This is where, when we talk about the time of slavery, not all history is based on hatred, mistreatment, and abuse of slave owners against the enslaved. There was also a beautiful story that should be told, as is the case that I'm telling you right now. But for this work, we will not talk about a tragic story about the marital relationship between blacks and whites, freely consensual or imposed during slavery. That is why I will focus on talking about a personal story based on my life as a white woman living with a black man during slavery, a black man whom I loved with all my heart, not caring what society thought of me, not thinking about my personal reputation, but also the possibility that I could lose everything by having an interracial relationship which was forbidden. During slavery in the United States, was there never any type of marital relationship or concubinage between a black man and a white woman? It is a response that many want to hide, especially when supremacist ideas dominated the cultural environment of the time among the white population, who said that white women were fragile, submissive, sexually repressed, obedient to their white husbands, but above all believer in the Christian faith, type of belief that prohibited interracial marriage relationship and let alone any kind of sexual activity between a white woman and a black man that was considered more than an immoral act was also considered a sin. Do you really think that a white woman never had sex with a black man or had some kind of fantasy associated with black men's bodies during slavery? It is time to break with this social taboo that historically protects the image of the white woman during slavery to the detriment of the image of the black woman. During slavery, the sexual exploitation of black women was a known fact, which was prohibited by the church. Reasons why the image of the black woman was never protected by society, much less by the church, who considered her as an impure woman from the moment she was born, inheriting all the sins of her non-Christian parents. Do you really think that a white woman never had sex with a black man or had some kind of fantasy associated with black men's bodies during slavery? It is time to break with this social taboo that historically protects the image of the white woman during slavery to the detriment of the image of the black woman. During slavery, the sexual exploitation of black women was a known fact, which was prohibited by the church, but the use of the body of black slaves to satisfy the sexual fantasies of white women is something that nobody dared to talk about. It is the kind of social taboo on interracial relationships before and after the Civil War that we will try to recognize by telling this story of the relationship which was prohibited during slavery in the United States. Story in which a white woman was deeply in love with a black man, a white woman who dared to challenge that anti-black idea imposed by supremacist ideas that the union between blacks and whites was prohibited by men's laws, but also by laws of God. A woman who risked her life, her sense of morality, her religious beliefs to be with the man she loved. Many who are hearing this story will say that in the same way that slave owners had sex and impregnated black women, it was considered sexual abuse or rape when talking about sexual activity between a white woman and a black slave. This love story could fall under the same category in which the sexual abuse of a black slave by a white woman, given the power dynamic between a slave and his owner, in which the slave had to be submissive to the owner's demand. The problem with this reasoning is that my husband was a free black man who had the right to choose who to have a family with, and I was a simple white woman who fell madly in love with him without realizing it. The story I am telling does not fit into this category, especially when we talk about a free black man. Many times I wonder if this interracial relationship between a slave or free black man and a white woman was a myth during slavery, or is it really that some writers considered a taboo about which one could not speak, especially when it involves a relationship considered as prohibited but also immoral? It is possible that this story of forbidden love will change the perception that you have until now of interracial relations between white women and black women during slavery, before the Civil War in the United States and the emancipation of black slaves. Let's put this story in context of slavery to understand the danger that the white woman and the black man were exposed to. Remember, during slavery, the sexual relationship between a white man and a black slave as property of his master, she ran no danger of being found having a prohibited relationship with a white man, contrary to a white woman when she was found having sexual relations with a black man. This black man could be castrated and the mulatto son product of this forbidden relationship sold to the slave market. During the 1830s, hundreds of free blacks, some whose freedom had been purchased, others whose legal status was determined by the fact that their biological mother had had businesses and freehold property in North Carolina. Some prospered and became an integral part of the economic community, as was the case with my husband, a prosperous free black businessman, who was well known and respected by whites. The marital relationship between my husband and I, although it was the product of love, mutual respect, and commitment to our children, was a type of relationship known only to the most intimate friends and family. Both my husband and I understood the risk that this type of relationship had in a society where the marital union between a black man and a white woman was socially prohibited and persecuted by those supremacist-minded white people who did not accept this type of interracial union. As wife and husband, it was a type of relationship which only existed in our home, and the interaction as parents with our interracial children could never be shown publicly. Maybe that's why we never walk in the streets holding hands or showing any kind of love towards each other in public. We both knew that in the slave-holding society of that time, we must behave like strangers when we were both out of the house to avoid the hatred that many would show if they found out that we were husband and wife. As a white woman, mother of mulatto children, there were many times when I had to deny that those children, who were the product of the union between my husband and I, were my children to avoid verbal abuse, recriminations, and accusatory looks from people who were against me. People who were against of racial miscegenation between black and white. Something we must understand, black and white Southerners had been living with each other for more than 200 years, a closeness that produced the inevitable. The miscegenation of the races. That kind of entrenched socio-cultural and sexual interaction was difficult to suppress simply for the sake of an ideal that existed only in the mindset of those who saw blacks as less than equal, whether free blacks or slaves. To avoid the ridicule of the other children who saw my children as different, my children never went to school because they were not accepted in a few schools for whites, and education for black children did not exist. My children learned to do the same work as their father, a type of manual skill in furniture making which allowed us to have a comfortable life compared to the homes of children with enslaved parents. To understand a bit of the situation of slaves and free blacks, how is the case of a husband in the 1850s when the slave code was established that prohibited enslaved blacks from engaging in behaviors and activities that negatively affected the white population, such as disrespecting whites, trespassing on white property, getting married, or cohabiting, were the most difficult years for my husband, myself, and our children who were considered mulattoes. Now whoever is listening to this story understands that our union was a forbidden relationship. If the situation of the free blacks was extremely difficult, you can imagine the bad situation with the enslaved blacks who were forbidden to run away, produce counterfeit papers, rent to themselves, hunt with a gun, and be part of any type of meeting where slaves from different masters met. A man, my husband, a person considered free, were not allowed to bear arms, testify against whites in court, or compete in business on an equal footing with whites. Due to the type of business that my husband had, in which the manufacture, design, and repair of furniture was his specialty, as a way of avoiding the anger of other furniture manufacturers like my husband, I, as a white businesswoman, was the one who represented my black husband in all business, creating the appearance for the clients that the black man who accompanied me and did all the hard work was just a slave man who worked for me, and some of my children were just apprentices who helped in the jobs of the furniture workshop to his father. Something that you should know, there were many days and nights of fear in each one of us if the authorities discovered the relationship between a white woman and a black man in a society where this marriage was prohibited. But my greatest fears as a mother of children of color, because they would be the ones who would suffer the worst consequence of being separated from their parents for being from a different racial group and sold in the slave market by the authorities as punishment. You who are listening to this story, all the challenges of the marital relationship between my husband, a black man, and the person who speaks to you could only be overcome by love and mutual respect that we both had as husband and wife at a time when interracial relationships were prohibited. Breaking with that myth associated with slavery, our mulatto children were not the product of rape, it was the product of love. And it is something that you should consider when you listen to the history of the mulatto population in the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like this type of content, please let me know your comments.